Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're taking a close look at a man who literally engineered the modern world, Henry Ford. You know, he's a figure of immense, almost unbelievable contradictions. On one hand, you have this revolutionary industrialist who completely changed how we live, work, and travel. But on the other hand, he was a man holding deeply flawed, highly damaging personal beliefs. So today we're setting the stage for an objective, structured exploration of his life, his business, and his incredibly complex legacy.
Okay, let's quickly map out our journey for today. We're going to cover 1. The rise of Ford Motor. 2. Revolutionizing the assembly line. 3. Welfare capitalism and labor wars. 4. Pacifism, prejudice, and war. And finally, number 5, global expansion and final years.
Section 1. The rise of Ford Motor, from farm boy to industrial pioneer.
It's kind of funny, despite growing up on a Michigan farm, a place he absolutely despised, by the way, Ford was dead set on building a successful car company. But it wasn't a straight shot to the top. It was actually a stumbling start born from a whole series of early failures and strategic pivots. Back in 1896, while working as an engineer, he finished his first self-propelled automobile, the Ford Quadricycle. But commercial success? That wasn't instant at all. He founded the Detroit Automobile Company in 1899, which completely failed because the cars were lower quality and a higher price than he wanted. Then came the Henry Ford Company in 1901, and he actually ended up leaving that one just a year later over disputes with consultants. It wasn't until 1903, backed by new investors, including the famous Dodge brothers, that the Ford Motor Company as we know it today was finally successfully founded.
Section 2. Revolutionizing the assembly line, mass production for the masses.
$825. That was the price tag on the original Model T when it debuted in October of 1908. Now, while that was relatively inexpensive compared to the massive luxury cars of that era, it was still way out of reach for your average American, and Ford really wanted to change that. He built a massive publicity machine and a huge, sprawling network of local dealers just to make the car ubiquitous. He was pushing hard for a future where absolutely everyone could own one.
To really grasp the scale of his genius, we just need to track his production over time. By 1913, Ford introduced moving assembly belts into his plants, which was a concept he actually developed alongside his employees. This unlocked a totally unbelievable increase in production speed, and the effect was undeniable. By 1916, that extreme efficiency drove the price of a basic touring car all the way down to just $360. Sales skyrocketed to nearly $500,000 that year alone, and by the time they stopped making the Model T in 1927, lifetime sales had reached over 15 million. That was an industry record that stood untouched for the next 45 years.
Section 3. Welfare capitalism and labor wars. The $5 day versus the iron fist. Let's look at a core concept of his early strategy, welfare capitalism. Now, for Ford, this wasn't really about charity. It was a desperate business necessity to stop a massive employee turnover rate. Imagine this. At one point, his departments were hiring 300 men a year just to keep 100 slots filled on the factory floor. To solve this, Ford pioneered welfare capitalism, realizing that holding on to expertise actually lowered his training costs, boosted productivity, and ultimately maximized his profits.
And here is where we hit the ultimate labor contradiction. In 1914, his progressive policies absolutely stunned the world. He introduced a $5 daily wage, which literally more than doubled the going rate for most of his workers. Later, in 1926, he instituted a 40-hour, 5-day work week. He essentially gave us the modern weekend. But at the exact same time, the man who doubled wages also employed a paramilitary force, led by Harry Bennett's service department, to violently crush union organizers. The tragic 1932 Ford Hunger March saw Dearborn Police and Ford Security actually opened fire on unemployed workers, leading to 5 deaths. And during the infamous 1937 Battle of the Overpass, union leaders like Walter Reuther were brutally beaten with clubs by Bennett's men. It's a staggering contrast.
Section 4. Pacifism, prejudice, and war. From the peace ship to dark controversies.
Back in 1915, Ford actually funded a peace ship mission to Europe. At the time, he was strictly against military intervention. He believed warfare was this terrible, wasteful folly that just stunted long-term economic growth. He even tried to stop World War I through this highly ridiculed mission to neutral European countries. But tragically, his worldview soon twisted into something much darker. He began blaming global conflicts on anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, alleging that greedy international financiers were the ones instigating the war.
The objective facts from the source material regarding his shifting worldview are frankly chilling. Ford purchased a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and used it to publish a series of anti-Semitic articles, which were later bound together into a book called The International Jew. And those words had a profound and terrible reach. In 1931, Adolf Hitler stated, "I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration." This echoed praise from a 1924 letter by Heinrich Himmler, who described Ford as a valuable, important, and witty fighter. So Ford's publications directly influenced the highest ranks of Nazi Germany, making him the only American to be favorably mentioned in Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf.
But there was a massive backlash. Civil rights groups and legal action fought back hard against his publications. The Anti-Defamation League publicly denounced him. Jewish groups and liberal Christians organized a widespread boycott of Ford products. And finally, a major libel lawsuit filed by Aaron Sapio severely threatened his business. Under all this immense pressure, Ford was forced to close down his paper in 1927 and issue a public retraction. Though, investigative journalists suggest that this apology was likely motivated mostly by a business slump, as his anti-Semitism was actively repelling potential car buyers.
58 minutes. Now, what does that number mean? Well, despite his initial outspoken opposition to the United States entering World War II, once the country actually did enter the fray, Ford's industrial machine pivoted incredibly rapidly. This staggering number shows just how fast Ford's massive purpose-built Willow Run plant was churning out B-24 bombers by 1945. At its absolute peak, a fully completed bomber was rolling off the assembly line every 58 minutes. This meant Ford ended up producing half of all the 18,000 B-24s used during the entire war.
Section 5. Global Expansion and Final Years. Building a Worldwide Empire and a Fading Patriarch. Ford's ambitions were way bigger than just America. He opened assembly plants in Britain and Canada as early as 1911. By the 1920s, his dealerships had spread across 6 continents. In 1929, he even signed a contract to help build the first Soviet automobile plant. See, Ford truly believed that if industry prospered everywhere, from India to Russia, international cooperation and trade would naturally replace neocolonialism. He felt this kind of economic independence and global expansion would benefit everyone and seriously reduce the chances of future wars.
But unfortunately, a failing, isolated Henry Ford soon faced the end of his reign. In the late 1930s, a series of strokes left him increasingly debilitated. Then tragedy struck in 1943 when his only son, Edsel Ford, died of cancer. Henry nominally resumed control, but he was fading really rapidly, and a handful of senior executives were essentially running the company. By 1945, with bankruptcy looming as a very serious risk, Henry's wife Clara and Edsel's widow Eleanor finally confronted him. They threatened to sell their stock, which was 3/4 of the company's shares, forcing Henry to finally hand over control to his grandson, Henry Ford II. Just 2 years later, in 1947, Henry Ford passed away from a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 83.
So, we end with a really difficult question. How should history weigh the legacy of a man who engineered the modern middle class, yet used his vast wealth and influence to promote deep societal hatred? And that is what you should take away from this explainer today. It's a challenging reminder that historical figures are rarely simple. We have to grapple with both their revolutionary innovations that completely shaped our modern world and their most damaging flaws that left deep, lasting scars. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep questioning and keep learning.